So, guten Morgen, liebe.
Good morning, everyone. So let me begin with the announcements. We have all the languages safe too. Unfortunately, there's no Croatian this morning, but we will have Croatian this afternoon and no Maltese. Now, this afternoon, we're going to be back in our usual room. There's a big conference going on there now, and that's why we had to move over here for this morning. So there's a new member whom I'd like to heartily welcome, Carlos Lautzen Jensen. There you are. Great, terrific welcome here in the group. And he's replacing Dan Jørgensen, who left in mid-December and who's become a minister in Denmark. Then, fourth announcement I have to make. Fourth announcement. There's an online tool we have now for developing our motions and applications. And we're having a trial run till Friday the 24th of January. If you need help from the assistants or from the fellow MEPs, make the most of it. So this is a trial run, seeing if we can improve things. Fifth announcement. There's a honey directive that we voted on in plenary. We had to suspend the final vote, and in March we're going to be voting in Envy and in the plenary. So there's supposed to be a group of visitors from Karl-Heinz Florence's constituency and from Sophie Ogonis. Is she here? Then on we go. Eighth point. The health workshop from Dennis Wilmot and Ada is going to be taking place on today, Tuesday, 12:30, in room P7, CO5 from 12:30 to 2:45 p.m. Then, something else. We are to replace a vice chair. I just announced that Dan Jørgensen left the group, and now that's the spot that we have to fill, make sure we have a full team. So I'm open to your suggestions. Linda.
Yes, Chair, we're very sorry to lose Dan Jørgensen, who was an excellent member of this committee and excellent Vice Chair, but is now the Danish Minister. But I'm very pleased that Claus Larsen Jensen has joined our group and would like to nominate him as the Vice Chair of this committee. He has a long background in European affairs, was the chair of the European Committee in the Danish Parliament previously, and so I'm sure he will make an excellent vice chair of this committee for the short time left in this Parliament.
Thank you very much for that proposal. Well, then I have to turn to the candidate. Klaus Jensen, are you willing to accept that?
Und dann können wir das nämlich per Akklamation.
Great. Then via acclamation, we can fill that vice chair seat. So that's a very good result, and I'm glad that we've got a full team up and running again. Item 4.
Gut, weiter geht's.
Great. That's the minutes of the 14th of November last year. No objections, so we can take it that those have been approved. And then a special welcome to the minister.
So, ich begrüße ganz.
So, a very warm welcome to the Greek Minister of Health, Mr. Georgidas, and we want to address a number of issues, and we have some very keen speakers about medical devices. There's the in vitro diagnostic devices, so we have a number of fellow MEPs who are keen on putting some questions to you, but the way it works is first you give your presentation, and then via the coordinators we're going to have a first round allowing the various political groups to put their questions, then you'll be given a chance to reply, and then we'll have a second round of question and answers. So without any further ado, if you're ready, over to you, Minister, the floor is yours.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everybody who's attending today's meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, honourable members, it's a great honour for me to be here today on the occasion of the Greek presidency of the European Council. And you are a basic part of the European construction and also representatives of the European citizens. This is the fifth Greek presidency since Greece joined the EU in 1981. This is a period of transition, and we're in a political environment which is characterised by great challenges both for Greece and the European Union. Recently, the European Union has been challenged by its citizens. There have been austere budget policies, particularly in countries who were hardest hit by the crisis, such as my country. And it's being challenged in a way that no member state of the EU has ever been challenged. We've seen the signs now that this crisis is close to an end. Greece, after a protracted period of depression, is coming out of recession and moving towards growth. However, it's not over. We still have record unemployment that particularly hits young people, particularly in my country. And we're just 4 months away from European elections, which is something which is conditioning the way our presidency will go ahead. We want to show what the European mission is with citizens. We want to show that we can deal with the crisis effectively and combat Euroscepticism. Our priorities address citizens' concerns, and I can summarise them right now. Firstly, we want to boost growth and employment and create new jobs. Secondly, we want to deepen economic and monetary union by supporting the single currency and increasing confidence in the European economy. Thirdly, we want to have an integrated policy for dealing with immigration. And fourthly, maritime policy. Here, we want to give new momentum. Now let me come on to our priorities in the field of health. Good health is a requirement for prosperity and economic growth, and as such, we will work to complete various legislative proposals and strengthening cooperation between member states for more effective health systems and better health for citizens. I'm very pleased that an agreement has been reached between the European Parliament, the Council and the Commission on a very important legislative proposal. It's on tobacco products. And I think this is going to be voted on in plenary. It's the same for the document on clinical trials, which is very important for research. There's also a document on in vitro testing of technological products. There's also patient safety. We need to restore trust in users, professionals and institutions, and that's very important for uninhibited movement of patients in Europe. We need to improve European competitiveness on a world scale and create jobs. We need to reduce costs. We will continue the work of previous presidency, and we hope to make important progress and reach agreements. As such, we have a very intensive work programme for the next 6 months. We've already held our first meeting with some very positive outcomes. Now, as for flu pharmaceuticals, we've provided the means for a piece of legislation, and we should get an agreement so that this legislation can come into force in June. For a trilogue with the European Parliament on this. And we hope this will go forward smoothly. And the first trilogue, we hope, will be very successful. Lastly, on transparency. This is to give transparency to prices and to compensation or reimbursement for medical products. We also want to support research and development in the medical field. We have to look at the economic crisis and the health sector. We are aware of the economic situation, how it's having an effect on health systems. And one of our main priorities is to make sure that health systems are effective and sustainable. We have a great deal of experience in our country over the last 3 years for obvious reasons. This needs to be discussed at European and national level. We want to continue this discussion in the informal Health Ministers' Council in April in Athens. We'll particularly look at how health systems have responded during a period of crisis in terms of their budgets, reforms, and health effects, the quality of service, and their responsiveness to citizens' needs. In Greece, we have an ambitious programme of reforms, and we're already getting positive results in sectors such as electronic records, reducing spending in the medical sector. Lastly, I'd like to express my thanks for the valuable advice given by the task force in Greece in this sector. We're talking about reforming our frontline healthcare for the most vulnerable members of society. And this Friday in our national parliament we'll discuss a law that has been created alongside the World Health Organization. We also have similar developments in other member states with some very positive results. We'd like to have an evaluation of this, and we'd like to look at best practices. And we can create an ideal package of measures to face crisis and create growth. We will move to council conclusions on this point. Secondly, immigration. One of our priorities is immigration, and we'd like to look at that in terms of health. We need to have a holistic approach to this. It does apply to some countries which are on the outskirts of the European Union, but it does affect everybody because there are no borders for patients. We need to show solidarity, and we need to be proportional in distributing the burden. We'd like to have an exchange of view of how to deal with health and immigration and the effects it has on public health services. We'd also like to show the positive aspects of working together on this common challenge. Thirdly, diet and physical exercise, two of the main factors that can have an impact on health. We'd like to promote good diet in combination with exercise as positive lifestyle choices throughout the life cycle from childhood to old age in the context of a fight against certain illnesses. We're going to have a political meeting in February and we will produce council conclusions on that. Fourthly, electronic health. We'll give particular emphasis to innovation in order to increase the effectiveness of health system. We will create a report on e-health 2014. We'll look at the digital agenda and creating particular health solutions that will substantially contribute to reforming healthcare and helping patients as well as boosting economic growth and creating jobs. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Minister. Well, looks like in the coming weeks, coming months, there's a lot of work ahead. And we're going to be sitting till Easter, so we don't have all that much time to proceed with trialogues. So there's going to be a bit of stress, but we have begun a number of issues and we want to see them through, hopefully. And I trust that we all see eye to eye on that score. I now suggest that we open with the coordinators' questions. First, Peter Liese, and then Dagmar Roth-Behrendt. Thank you very much, sir, for your report and for the work you're seeing too. We already had an opportunity to have a short discussion, and I think you're being very proactive in your presidency. Just a couple of points. One, it's been mentioned that the crisis is basically in the past, as it were, and I think we have some figures and facts going to show that. Greece has a structural budget surplus. That is to say, if you leave out the old debt, more money is coming in than is being spent. So that is a situation that they would dream of in the United States, and all of those who said can't happen, Greece should be out of the euro. No, we know that this has entailed a lot of sacrifices, a lot of efforts, but it is a success story, and it goes to show that the solidarity wasn't wasted. I just wonder, when it comes to the health area, what reform measures are underway? We'd heard that not that many generics are used in Greece. You tend to use the more expensive proprietary medicines. So could you comment on that? And then secondly, quite clearly the legislation on medicines and the various diagnostic tests, we are looking forward to having a mandate for the trilogue so that we could wind this up before the elections. That would be good for industry and for patients. So if that isn't possible, I would ask you to incorporate in the council position as much as what you can, as what was agreed, in particular the notified bodies. I take it that that is something that the council should be able to accept. And when it comes to informed consent, DNA testing, even in the U.S., there's some very lively discussion underway that without any consulting, you can carry out DNA tests. And there has been some bans. So it's not just the European Parliament that's concerned about this. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Matthias. Thank you very much, Mr. Georgiadis and Mr. Council President. I'm full of admiration what you have managed to do in your country, especially in the health sector. That is a difficult area, and we all know here, Mr. Liese referred to it, we know that how much Greek people suffered in the last years. And the health sector is always a sector which touches especially fragile people who are ill anyway, or whose family members or acquaintances or friends are ill. So it's always, they are even more weak and hurt than a lot of other people. And to have a health sector which is down on the ground is even more difficult. We know what you have done and what you have reached already, which is very much thanks to you as well and to your government, but you still have some way to go. And that you referred to good health as a condition for functioning society is something we should have as a mind in other member states as well. And we always referred, in every treaty change, we always referred that we should have comparable, not the same, but comparable conditions on support for people who need medical support. Having said that, your government and the Greek society would be perhaps much better off if all those countries in the long past who took money from Greece as credits would pay those credits back, especially my own country, for example. But that is a very personal comment which I make here, and I hope that your government is successful with the new government to remind them on their obligations and responsibilities from the past. Coming back to the presence, again as well, I have to, as we did bilaterally already, I have to refer to medical devices. We are running out of time to find a decision. I know that some member states obviously were not so keen on. It's interesting that those member states who were very relaxed on medical devices are so keen on pharmacovigilance and can be so speedy there. Why am I such a bad person, and why do I have such a bad character that I believe it is because of the euro signs on their accounts and because they see how much money goes back to the member states when they have the fees for pharmacovigilance? That is really perhaps not a very politically correct remark, I know that, but there is some truth in it, because the same reluctantness member states showed in the last year on medical device, the same speediness by sudden they have in the last months only on pharmacovigilance. So perhaps you would want to remind as well member states how fast they can work if they want to. So we simply think they do not want. And we perhaps should, sorry Linda, perhaps we should stop the transfer of money from pharmacovigilance and should stop that as long as they are not speedier in other areas, because we know why they are speedy on pharmacovigilance. It is important, but we know the personal interest as well. So we know that the member states were slow, and we know that it needs somebody who pushes. The Lithuanian presidency was a very ambitious presidency, but perhaps they were too nice. I hope you're ambitious and less nice. And perhaps you could hide that being less nice in nevertheless being loved by everybody, which sometimes can happen. It's difficult, but it can. So if we want to proceed now, we need to have an idea what we could finalize. And if we just want to finalize something, we need to start trilogues as soon as possible. I understand you could be ready mid-February. That would be the latest. And will we then be ready to discuss Chapter 2, single use and reprocessing, Chapter 3, EUDAMED, Chapter 4, notified bodies, and Chapter 5, the system of approval? Because those are the bits we really should be able to reach an agreement. And as Mr. Liese said, referred to the system of change, system of notified bodies. Now, just the day before yesterday, a court again has repeated a court judgment, a court ruling against TÜV Rheinland, a German notified body, who is now again obliged in a court ruling to pay compensation on the PIP scandal on breast implants. What else do member states need to understand that the system of notified bodies as it is now is not working? What else do they need? I have no clue. But perhaps you are more convincing than others could be. And then, Mr. President of the Council, I would like to know if we now reach a deal in trilogue, and if we have a plenary vote in April, which is the last plenary we can do that, what assurance do we have and what guarantee do we have that the rest of that part of the legislation, what we have not yet dealt with, will not fall down the drain, but will be taken on board and will be as well be negotiated as the Parliament has decided already in its first vote. That is something naturally is difficult for you, I know, but there could be a declaration of the Council, kind of as an honest broker, nothing more, nothing less we could have, and that is what I think is the minimum we would have to do, but it would need a lot of speed if we want to proceed like that.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. That was clear. Well, my colleague is always extremely frank. Rebecca Tyler now.
Thank you, Chair. Problematic consumption of alcohol and alcohol dependence is linked to around 60 chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, and liver disease. In Greece, your own country, Minister, it's estimated that 1.3% of women and 4.2% of men are alcohol dependent. The European Parliament and Council have repeatedly stated the need for stronger integrated measures to reduce alcohol-related harm. And the European Commission is currently preparing an action plan which will be finalised during your presidency. With this in mind, how is the presidency planning to contribute to the shaping of this plan and to facilitate the commitment necessary from Council to implement, because obviously it's a member state competence to implement? Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Nicholas Chrysogelis from the Greens.
Thank you very much, Minister. I really do hope that you will have great success in the area of health, even though our country is facing huge problems. We're dealing with European issues at the same time as we have to face our own issues in Greece. There are 3 million people without insurance in Greece at the moment. 1/3 of the Greek population doesn't have health insurance. They don't have access to the health system, which means at least 1 million people have no access to any health services today. They haven't been able to pay insurance contributions for several years. We've had 5 hospitals closed down recently. Many of them don't have doctors. And there's problems with the reforms of the health systems. In that context, the Greek presidency has to solve the problems in our country, but particularly they have a responsibility at a European level. A very important issue that we Greens have put to the ENVI committee is to assess the effectiveness of health systems during a crisis and also assess the effectiveness of these reforms. It's not just a problem that concerns Greece, Spain and Portugal. There are other countries that have faced crises in the past, such as Germany and Finland. So we have to evaluate the effect of the reforms with the involvement of civil society. I'm not sure if you've planned any involvement of civil society from throughout Europe. In the European Parliament, we've had many hearings with Médecins du Monde and other organisations. They've brought us some very moving testimonies. Another issue is the effect of the situation on vulnerable social groups, not just in countries suffering from the crisis, but also in France and Belgium and so on. So I think it would be very good for us to have a clear image of the situation around Europe as regards that. Another issue that is a concern to our committee is the effects of climate change on health. In our country, there are examples such as Nile fever, which are typical of other climate areas. Now that they've moved to our country, And in 2015, there'll be a major conference in Paris, and I think that the presidency should prepare something on health and climate change. Third, immigration. As you've said, it's true that we need solidarity on migration policy, but there are many myths at play. And they're often used by the far right. It's said that migrants tend to suffer from certain illnesses. I've done some research, and that's not true. It's just an urban myth, and it's used by the far right to say that migrants bring illness. On the other hand, often migrants are excluded from health systems. So we could use European resources to try and cover that. Recently, Greece has started to use European funds. There has to be cooperation between hospitals. They have to look at what help can be provided to those migrants. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Kotakis from the ECR.
Thank you, Chairman, and congratulations to the Greek presidency. I look forward to a successful presidency, and I know that you are more than capable of running the show for the next 6 months. Can I just make things clear for my colleagues? They've referred to the Greeks suffered. The Greeks haven't suffered. The Greeks are suffering. They continue to suffer. The economy might be improving on paper, but the people are still suffering. They're still selling their furniture. They're still selling anything they can to survive. So let's not kid ourselves when we speak about this. The government is working hard, but the people are still suffering. Now, I thank Greece in a way for the doctors we are getting who are Greek, who are coming to London now to practice. They are of a very high standard, and there seems to be a brain drain in this area, which is unfortunate for Greece. Could you tell me, though, bearing in mind the problems that you've had over the past 3 years or more, how you'll be able to use this experience in your presidency year, bearing in mind that many member states have economic problems. I mean, what are you doing with your reforms? How are the services managing with the austerity measures that we have to have? And another quick question is, you mentioned immigration in terms of health. Now, I know Greece, the borders aren't always as secure, and they have a lot of illegal immigrations. How do you cope with that? And how is it affecting the health of the region? I know that in the UK, for example, we've had TB on the increase from countries, people coming in, migrating, who have TB in their countries, whereas we'd almost eradicated it. So what diseases have you got? What challenges are you having from the immigration policy? And what have you done in terms of reform? And how will you be able to bring this to the table? Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Mr. Gur is next. Mr. Christousa.
Κύριε Υπουργέ.
Minister, the policy that you have been describing is against the people, and it's one that's been led by previous presidencies, by all governments in all member states. Before the capitalist economic crisis even came along, and it was applied whether the countries were capitalist countries or not. It was independent of whether they had a memorandum of understanding or not, or the degree of their public debt. The reason was supposedly economic growth. It was to support major people in business and to shore up monopolies. Health is really a golden goose for those investors. I want people to understand what situation our people are in Greece. This policy is for the Greek budget for 2014. There has been a huge decrease in spending in the health ministry. It's about 19%. compared to 2013. There's a reduction in funding in the Greek health service, specifically of 30%. Public hospitals have had their spending cut by 32% and pharmaceutical supplies by 17%. If you look at all of the cuts in the health insurance in terms of pensions and health, the amount is 1.8 billion euros. I think we all realise that we're talking about an enormous amount of money that will have a huge impact. It will have a huge impact on the provision of welfare and health services. This is undermining the health of workers. It's also depriving health workers. Another huge issue is the 1.5 million unemployed people who are now no longer covered by public health insurance. The underfunding of clinics and hospitals and the public health insurance systems is something which is having significant effects on their staff. Often, permanent staff are being replaced by part-time staff. This is constantly deteriorating working conditions, but also the services provided to the public. Over the last 3 years, there has been an increase in individual spending on pharmaceuticals by 27%. This is to the benefit of pharmaceutical countries and at the price of patients. Lastly, I'd like to point out the following. This policy is being followed both in terms of frontline health care and throughout the rest of the social system. We need to keep the insurance afloat for citizens. I didn't just come here to talk about the serious effects of these policies on welfare and health. I want to continue to state that we would like a fully free and state-run healthcare system based on prevention we need immediate and direct methods on that subject.
Thank you very much for your extensive speech here. We do have interpretation and loudspeakers here, so the volume level could be reduced without detriment. Now, that's the end of the first round of questions, and I would like to ask the Minister to answer the questions that have been raised. And after that, we'll start the second round of questions, because I see there are many colleagues on the speakers list. Minister.
I'll try to reply to all the questions. Thank you very much for taking the time to ask me those questions. Let me begin with Mr. Lisa. The crisis is continuing. Greece has achieved things over the recent years that I never believed that we would have been able to do in such a short period of time. we have required huge sacrifices from Greeks. All Greek citizens have lost on average 30% of their income over the last 30 years. I've said this to the Council. It's something that sounds abstract, but in reality it's very difficult. This change hasn't happened in Greece without a huge amount of sacrifice from the Greeks and a lot of help from the EU. Greece is a symbol of the euro debt crisis, but Greece could also become the symbol of the turning of the page, the new path of the European Union towards a better tomorrow, and I really believe that. Now let me come on to the particular questions that you ask of me. On generics, Greece started from a very low starting point. We've taken a series of measures to reform the health sector, and we've implemented a series of measures. We've gone from 14% to 22%. We want to get to 60% of use of generic drugs in Greek territory. And to do that, we have started to drop the prices of generic, provided incentives to doctors and pharmacists to prescribe generics. And we've also started a public campaign to encourage them to use generic drugs. And so that there's no misunderstanding about this issue among the population. This is a way of controlling pharmaceutical spending among the population. That's also an answer for Ms. Rockberg. Health is a key issue for the Greek presidency. We want to get an agreement as soon as possible, bearing in mind the various viewpoints that different member states have on this subject. But we think that the common interest is not to leave this issue pending for the future. And with a European approach, I think we can move forward. On the issue of DNA, I understand that this has been raised in the working group in Council. We still don't have a final position, so it's being looked at. It's a very complex issue, so I can't really give you an answer. Ms. Alberg, I know that you've made a huge amount of effort on this subject, and we respect that. I know that there's been a huge amount of effort to push this dossier forward. The Greek presidency has already taken some initial steps. We finished in the first reading. We have a working group on this subject coming up in January and February. And when the working group finishes this in February, we will be able to tell you exactly where we're at and how much closer member states' positions are. We will be in constant contact with you in any case. I absolutely agree that how the system works today in terms of clusters and modified bodies and so on, there is a problem. And we all know that there's a problem. We have to find or strike a balance between a controlled market that will enable us to have transparency and the safety of patients, which is at the heart of this, without, on the other hand, losing the competitive edge. I think we all have a positive approach to this. We are, of course, willing to work hard on this. If I can make a personal comment now, the reforms in Greece are rather slow in coming. But they couldn't have happened without Mr. Reichenberg and the task force. They followed every step of this effort. They were really personally interested. They came to our country and they understood the pain that our country was suffering from. Ms. Taylor now. I understand, I agree that prevention is key. And we have to address health throughout the population, especially looking at young people, and address the issue of alcohol. In October, in the context of a national group, we set up a group working on damage coming from the consumption of alcohol, and there will be a report within this year. Generally, Greece isn't a country with the biggest problem in this area. Mr. Chrysoilo. Let me explain my view on this. On the issue of immigration, we believe in European solidarity. We have to respect the human rights of these people. We can't leave people unprotected. What we're saying is that in order for Greece and other countries that for geographical reasons are accepting or receiving these waves of migration have to be able to have the support and assistance of other European countries. We can't be the only ones suffering under this pressure. This has to be a European issue because all Europeans realise the need to protect the human rights of these people and providing them with all of the health services that they require. Each country on their own, and particularly Greece in its current situation, cannot bear that burden alone. So it has to be something, a subject of European solidarity. On patients, or on the illnesses, we had a worry about polio in Greece, which was confirmed by the WHO, coming from Syria. I don't blame them, but it's true that they do bring some illnesses. They have often covered huge distances. They've often suffered a great deal. So they are more vulnerable and they're more exposed to the risk of various illnesses. So we're not discussing whether they bring illnesses or they don't. Some of them do, and we have to look at how we deal with that. As the European Union, we have to face this phenomenon correctly. Because the spread of diseases that have been eliminated in Greece, but in Europe generally, are now being reintroduced. And that is an issue that the Greek presidency would like to work on. For example, provision of healthcare over the last 10 years has cost the Greek state hundreds of millions of euros. And as you know, the budget is in a very difficult situation. Every euro counts. So in this situation, the far right are playing on the anger of citizens because it seems like we're playing for them. That's not necessarily how things are, but that's how it's being represented. That's how Greek citizens are experiencing this. And some political parties are manipulating that information. All the studies that have been done in the OECD, but our own as well, show that Greece is in the European average. Greece is not lagging behind in terms of vaccines. As regards health and climate change, this is a very interesting subject. It's very important, very interesting. not had that many effects recently from climate change. We haven't had very hot summers, but there is a problem and we are following this. You talked about civil society. Well, we haven't planned anything. I'm very interested in what you've said. I have no objection to something like that. I'll perhaps write to you about this. There is a big problem. But the fact that 3 million Greeks don't have access to health insurance is not exactly true. All Greeks have access to healthcare. There is no hospital that will throw somebody else if they need healthcare, whether they are Greeks or immigrants. The problem is for chronic illnesses or day-to-day illnesses. The current reforms that we are carrying out is to create this overall health system in public. It won't differentiate between whether somebody has healthcare coverage or not. But we are trying to deal with this very big problem. On Ms. Yannakoudakis' question, I have many friends who are in that exact situation who have gone abroad to work. Greece has a lot of doctors. One of the problems of our system is that we have 75,000 doctors, and we should have about 25,000 given the size of our population. So we have a lot of people who want to become doctors in our country and did become doctors. In order to be able to use all of those doctors in Greece, all the entire population would be ill, and that's not a very good idea. So yes, some will have to go abroad to look for work. And the fact that they are finding good jobs in Britain is not a big problem for Greece. A lot of the time they prefer, as a European, the fact that we can work in different countries and exchange our workforce is not a problem. We are in a new period of European mobility. As regards the reforms during the crisis, they were very difficult. You did say that the people are suffering, and in the present tense, not in the past tense, absolutely. But Greece suffered from such a huge crisis that the idea that we could recover from it overnight without suffering any consequences is an illusion. Our government has worked very hard to make that change as quickly as possible, because we understand that people are suffering, but we can't work miracles. We are trying our best and we think that we're on the right path. Now, to Mr. Toussa. I understand the large ideological difference that we have, but let me try to be honest. We continue to... Well, many people focus on the wrong areas. Sometimes people forget the big picture. Europe is still the best place in the world to live. It's the place with the best democracy. It's the place with the highest respect for human rights. It's the place that has managed to give its citizens the highest level of prosperity for the longest time and the highest level of peace. If you set Europe up as a sort of demon, well, I don't think you're looking at the long history of support and solidarity between many people. Your party and others in Greece, when Greece was spending 3 times as much on health, I think you would, even if that was still the case now, you would be saying the same, because we were actually wasting money at the time. And that was actually costing the Greek population. I'm not talking about the Communist Party. I'm saying other people, not just your party. Today, we have reduced our spending. That's involved reforms. without reducing the health services at all. Today, our hospitals have less staff and they are working better than they did before on less money. So let's not just see everything negatively. And as I said before to Mr. Chrysoyelo, our goal in reforming the healthcare sector is to enable all citizens to have access to healthcare regardless of whether they are covered by health insurance or not.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Minister. Second round now of questions. Let me note the list here. Make sure that I haven't overlooked anyone. Peterle, Estrella, Koupazakos, Schluter, then Lippmann. Rebecca Taylor again. Then Bokosh as well. Have I overlooked anyone? No. We've got a camera team here. Polzat, who's along with Mrs. Hoopner. So here we go, round two. Peterle, go right ahead.
Mr. Minister, firstly, I would like to congratulate yourself and your government because of the positive trends in growth. As a co-president of the Working Group on Health and a member of the special group of members who are fighting against cancer, I was glad that you were talking about effectiveness of health care and health systems in Greece. I have three questions. Where do you see a need and possibilities for European added value when it comes to health? Second, which are the key elements of the Greek reform strategy? I would like to know what you will do to improve efficiency, effectiveness. The crisis has focused on effectiveness especially. And thirdly, what will Greece do to fight cancer? Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Next, Ms. Estrella, please.
Obrigada, Sr. Presidente. Kalimera, Sr. Ministro.
Kalimera, Minister. I'm Portuguese. I've been following very carefully events in Greece with a lot of interest, and that's why I wanted to express my solidarity, because the Greeks have been suffering as a result of the austerity program that was imposed on them, just as the Portuguese have suffered. So I do wish you every success in your presidency. Now, Minister, you've already mentioned a number of priorities, including to make the health system more sustainable and more efficient. So you want to improve citizens' health. What I would like to know is what are the specific measures which the Greek presidency is going to be introducing with a view to achieving that aim. And I'm particularly interested because I was the rapporteur in the House in this particular issue when it comes to reducing health inequality within the EU. And you said that in Greece, all citizens had access to health care, but in actual fact, as a result of the crisis, the health system in Greece and Portugal and elsewhere is closed to a number of people who don't have access for economic reasons. People don't have the money they used to. 30% less has been mentioned, so people don't have access to the health care or to the medicines they should. And according to a 2011 Commission document, a major slab of the population doesn't have access to health care. And one reason is the long waiting periods. And that's something that affects, first and foremost, women. So given these difficulties, the economic situation, the living conditions are affected, and that includes health. So to put a very clear question to you, Minister, how is the Greek presidency going to be contributing to reversing these developments and to see to it there will be fewer inequalities in terms of healthcare within the EU? Thank you.
Dank.
Thank you very much. Kumuzakov, next, please.
I hope they have the same treatment, time-wise, as colleagues from GUE. Thank you. Κύριε Υπουργέ, σας καλωσορίζω στο Ευρωπαϊκό.
Minister, thank you for your speech and welcome to the Environment Committee. We have a great deal of expertise in the issues that you're discussing, public health. I wish you a very successful presidency. This is a very difficult presidency, on the one hand because it coincides with the moment when Europe and Greece is leaving the crisis, but also because it's coming at a time of European elections. So you have a very high number of legislative texts to produce in a very limited period of time, 3 or 4 months. So the workload is going to be very heavy. I'm not going to refer to things that other colleagues have mentioned as regards your work programme. But in light of the European elections and the very sensitive political moment in which Greece is called on to fulfil this role, I'd like to come back to one of the presidency priorities that you mentioned. And these are two issues of vital importance to European citizens: immigration and public health. This is extremely important, and we should all congratulate the Greek presidency for including these two topics among their priorities, because, as I said, it's of importance to our citizens. It's a very politically sensitive moment. Immigration is putting pressure on some very fragilized health systems in certain countries of the European Union. The solution is not to exclude these vulnerable people from our health system. That would be very far from our European spirit. However, the solution cannot be inaction either. We can't stay where we are today because there are problems. So we need a European solution that uses solidarity. You have opened the debate as the presidency, and that's very good. But are you predicting any sort of agreement or a political text, a framework for how to deal with such a complex problem at a European level? I don't think we can come up with a legislative text because there's been no work on it yet, but it would be very important, beyond just starting discussions. And as this is part of your priorities, if we could, by the end of the presidency, get some kind of framework text so that over the course of the next Parliament and the next Commission, we can come up with some legislative proposals on this. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Carl Schlüter, next.
Tack, herr ordförande. Välkommen, herr minister. Om ni har många läkare så kanske...
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Let me speak English.
Midwives, and we have an acute lack of midwives in Sweden, so if they're heartily welcome to come and work there. But we have spoke a lot about Greece, and I would also ask you about tobacco policy. We are adopting the new tobacco directive very soon. And this is an issue where you could save a lot of money and problems by fighting tobacco also at home, but also make sure that this directive we are now voting is actually also implemented properly in all countries. I would like also to mention the issue of hormone-disrupting chemicals. I think it's one of the most underestimated problems. We have adopted resolutions here. We had discussions about bisphenol and other hormone-disrupting chemicals. Are you planning to do any initiatives on that issue during your presidency? I think that could be really, really helpful to put pressure on the Commission to move forward on this issue. I think it's very underestimated, and also the problem is that it's a long time between exposure and effect. I also wonder, on the alcohol strategy, we're discussing the alcohol strategy now, and some measures that we might discuss is, for example, alcohol labeling. I think there is a big misunderstanding among people about the effects of alcohol. The link with cancer is not very well known, and the very high calorie level in alcohol is not very known. So what is your take on labeling requirements on alcohol? Because the Commission is supposed to revise that next year. So what do you think about alcohol labeling as such also? And then finally, one thing, very short. We have talked about the cost of drugs, and you mentioned it yourself. Of course, you have the option for compulsory labeling, compulsory licensing. Have that been discussed as a tool in certain cases in Greece? And also, as an innovation model, instead of having to have patents that cost very much, and thereby denying access to drugs that are already invented because states cannot afford them, have you ever discussed or intend to discuss during your presidency the idea about prize funds as an innovation mechanism where you actually get a one-time amount for innovation? Everything comes in the public domain, all knowledge will be in the public domain, and as soon as something is invented and you get paid for the one time in the prize, then actually rich countries, poor countries, Africa, everywhere could have access to the best treatment when they are new already. They don't need to wait 20 years for having them generically. Have you discussed this innovation model, and what is your opinion on it?
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Daibna.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would very warmly like to welcome the Minister. And I must say that it was very encouraging what you said about European solidarity. I am from the immediately post-war generation, so I appreciate solidarity, although I am in a decreasing number of people from that generation. Now, you, Minister, mentioned some elements which were only touched on in a minor way. You didn't say about the programme about to tackle ageing. We know that we have ageing in Europe, and we know we have an ageing society, and we must be prepared to care for people who are getting older to ensure their further health. You, Minister, mentioned the conference, so do you have any plans to tackle the issue of ageing in the health systems of individual countries? That's an important issue, Minister, because you mentioned the diversification of healthcare in different countries. So I think this conference will be crucial to get an overview of healthcare systems in different countries. And what do you suggest possibly creating a European basic healthcare system which could cover all countries? Now, of course, there might be some countries which have more resources and more possibilities than countries which have fewer resources. That's obvious. But I'm just talking about a basic, fundamental healthcare system, so that we wouldn't have to say that the Swedish programme, the Polish programme, the German programme, the Greek programme. No, we could talk about a single European initiative. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Dann noch ein
Thank you very much. Then a further question from Rebecca Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm asking this question on behalf of my colleague, Chris Davis, who unfortunately cannot make it here. I wanted to raise the point of air quality and the link between poor air quality and respiratory problems and also cardiovascular disease. It's very interesting that actually this morning I've read details of a BMJ study in 5 European countries that looks at long-term data for 100,000 people, so a very large study, and confirms a link between pollution and risk of heart attack. It's only a small link, but it confirms the link. And so I was, and what the article is saying, in fact, the study is saying that existing air quality rules are, it's under the existing rules, even within them, within the limits that these health damages have been identified. So I just wondered if the Greek presidency was planning to look at the issue of air quality, because I understand there is, in general, resistance to stricter rules. Thank you.
Vielen Dank und
Thank you very much. Lajos Bakas, please.
Dankeschön, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Chairman.
Let me also join those who have expressed their solidarity with the Greek people for the enormous suffering which is still happening there. I agree with my colleague on that. But at the same time, it's important to realize, ladies and gentlemen, why the Greek people are suffering. And sometimes people are mixing the illness with the medicine and therapy. It's not the medicine which is responsible for the suffering, but the illness, the sickness. Had it not been for the rescue package administered by the Troika and the European Union, Greece could have gone openly bankrupt, and it would have lost not 25% of its GDP, but 50% of its GDP. So I think in a committee which is full of doctors, I think we have to appreciate very much the distinction between the medicine and the original problem. But nevertheless, solidarity stands. 3 small questions, or short questions, if I may. One is about cooperation with Turkey. Greece is so close to Turkey that it have no choice but to cooperate on many issues, including public health, including on immigration. And I'm just wondering, as the Minister is now in the presidency, can tell us more how Greece can help Turkey in that area and vice versa. The other is the impact of the Syrian tragedy. I think it's a disgrace for the whole European Union not to be able to help the Syrian refugees more, and also the problem is the lack of political solution for the crisis, but nevertheless, the EU should contribute, I think, much more to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people, especially the refugees, and it has a public health aspect to that, epidemics, etc. So I would love to get your contribution on that. And last but not least, you mentioned, and quite rightly, the brain drain of doctors out of Greece. But it's not a Greek problem exclusively. It's a problem for Romania, it's a problem for Bulgaria, those 2 very, very poor countries of the European Union. So we have now a huge emigration of qualified personnel to Sweden, United Kingdom, many other countries where salary levels are way above what these countries can pay. So is there any grand design scheme you can think of how to keep Greek doctors, Bulgarian doctors, and Romanian doctors back at home? Thank you very much.
vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bakos. Now, Minister, you've got the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Let me start with Mr. Peterle. Thank you very much for the question. We've set up a program in Greece with the task force. It's called Health in Action. I can send it to all the members of the committee. It's a show of European solidarity and how, in specific sectors, one state can help another. So there you will see the specific reforms that have already begun and that are about to begin where other European countries have come to Greece and shared their expertise. Mr. Koumoutsakos talked about immigration, and there we need European solidarity. Not just Greece, but all countries that are reception countries for these large waves of immigration, and where we need a proper management of this European issue. So we will try to get Council conclusions to show how, during a time of crisis, European solidarity can practically help a country in crisis, such as Greece. And as regards patients and cancer sufferers, I don't think the situation is rosy in Greece, on the contrary, but I would repeat that in vulnerable groups, such as a cancer patient, they do get their drugs for free. And that's not easy because, as you know, we are facing huge problems. Now to Ms. Estrella. Bom dia. I know that during this period our countries are experiencing similar problems. Our countries are suffering more from the crisis. Let me tell you that inequality in the health system is a huge issue. Tomorrow, I'm going to speak to a section which is specialised in inequality, and under the chairmanship of Michael Marmot, we are creating a national network for Southern European countries to look at how they face inequality in the health sector. Over the course of the crisis, we have tried to deal with practical issues in a way to deal with inequality. We got European funding for health programs, and we provide free services to people who are not covered by health insurance and who are excluded from services that other people have access to. We are going to present a plan, and this is one of the plans that we're working with the World Health Organization on. So we're going to come up with a minimum health safety net for the weakest in society in order to counteract those inequalities. I know that we have a lot of problems because everybody has access to emergency services, nobody's turned away, but in terms of everyday healthcare, people who lose their healthcare coverage, unemployed people, are almost excluded from the system. And what we're doing now in working on that frontline healthcare is trying to get access for those people. Now to Mr. Skleter, sorry. As for labelling of alcoholic drinks, I'm not against that. This is something that other ministries deal with, those that deal with food. We work more on prevention rather than labelling. Mr. Karoflis, who's working on this, could perhaps give you a clearer answer. But personally, I'm in favour of these reforms and changes. As regards reforms in terms of new drugs and patents and what's happening there, I'm very interested in that. I haven't done anything on it yet. We are working more on the agreement on clinical trials and more traditional paths. I understand what you've said. And perhaps this is a solution which would reduce inequality on a world scale. But I think that here this is a very complex, because people get a lot of money to create new drugs. I don't know how we can change this. But it's a very interesting idea. I'm glad that I've heard it. It's not, however, something that the Greek presidency is going to work on. Mr. Koumoutsakos now. I think you've said things exactly as they are. The Greek presidency and the Italian presidency, which will come afterwards, are two countries which are facing the same problem in terms of receiving waves of immigration. This is a really huge issue. And it can't be restricted to a national level. And as you quite rightly said, no European citizen would want to refuse healthcare to those who need it. As I said, Europe is the best place to live because we have these values, which are not a given in other parts of the world. So another question is how we can deal with this very urgent and huge problem at a European level. I think our Council conclusions will deal with this. We would like to mobilise solidarity on this issue, and I think that will give us better results both for countries of reception and for those people who are arriving here and who have to have a humane level of treatment. Now, Ms. Hübner, thank you very much for your warm words. We are doing our level best in extremely difficult circumstances. I would not wish on any country or any government to go through what we've been through in recent years. On regard to the ageing population, well, the needs for healthcare then increase and the cost increase and the tax income reduces. And that's not something that just applies to countries under the Memorandum of Understanding. It happens in all countries. So here are two difficult factors. I agree with you that this is something that we should deal with it at a European level. The ageing population is a European problem. Ms. Taylor, the question was for Mr. Davis. Of course, contamination and pollution is a problem. This is something that we face in Athens because of traffic and because of the way that people heat their homes recently. We have close cooperation with the Ministry for the Environment. I would say that initiatives on this subject are really under the Ministry for the Environment. The Ministry for Health in Greece has noted that there is a risk from air pollution in terms of public health. And we are looking for an integrated policy on that issue. And it is something that Europe can look at. It's not just a Greek problem, it's a problem throughout Europe. And lastly, Mr. Bokros. I understand that the situation in Greece is much worse. That's why I voted for all these programmes. I understand that if we didn't have this programme, today Greece would have collapsed. It would be destroyed. Many Greeks don't understand this yet, but this is the reality. I said that Greeks had lost 30% of their income. If we had gone bankrupt, we would have lost 70% of our income. We would have been destroyed. That didn't happen thanks to the help of the European Union, and we're grateful for that. On the other hand, though, of course, each coin has two sides. That hasn't happened without huge tension and huge sacrifices on the part of Greek households. They're so many unemployed young people in Greece, 60% of young people. We don't have time. We have to try and reverse the trend before we lose an entire generation. That has to be a European goal. As regards the issue raised about Turkey and migration, we cooperate with Turkey. We are neighbours, and nobody thinks that we can go forward without cooperating with our close neighbours. It's true that we have different views on Cyprus, so there is an occupation of Cyprus, we can't forget that. But beyond that particular issue, which we mustn't forget, there is great cooperation with the Turkish authorities on several different levels, and particularly in the area of health. The new Horizon Research programme gives a great deal of opportunities for cooperation between Greece, Turkey and other Balkan countries. The Turks haven't been incredibly cooperative on the issue of immigration, I have to say. They've signed several agreements with the EU and with Greece to readmit migrants that come from their territory. They sign those agreements, but then they refuse to implement them. And that's something that the EU should look at, because it's also an agreement that the EU signs and they're not respected. I think we can agree pacta sunt servanta. If you sign something, you have to comply with it, and Turkey is not doing that, and that's a big problem. Now, as regards doctors and specialised staff leaving the country, there's a joint action programme at EU level. We want to try to reverse that trend. There is great unemployment in the countries you mentioned, and the difference in salaries is huge. A doctor in Greece could even be unemployed for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and if he finds a job, he may earn €2,000 a month. He can go to the UK and get £6,500 a month. It's quite difficult to convince him to stay in Greece then, especially if he works in the free market. So the Greek government will look at the issue, particularly the issue of the loss of specialised staff. Greece, Romania and Bulgaria invest money in the education of these staff, of these people, but the country doesn't benefit from that education because the investment goes to another country. That is something the Greek presidency is going to look at, and we want to have this looked at a European level. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for your presentation. I have to say I'm looking forward to the months of your presidency, and I also look forward to Ireland, which did have the presidency. Greece is a country with an unbelievable history, a culture of democracy. We know there are difficulties, but I'm also optimistic that you will overcome those difficulties. I know that citizens have had to make major sacrifices and continue to do so. And I agree with you that we need to ensure that we don't have a lost generation, not just in Greece, but over the entire EU. It's an enormous challenge, and it's our collective responsibility. We shouldn't point fingers at one another. We should get to work together to tackle that issue. In particular, healthcare is an area of core responsibility because you only have health once. You only have it until you lose it. So if we try and preserve it, that would be an important thing. I also found your optimism encouraging because sometimes people complain, even at quite a high political level. but you acknowledged your difficult situation, but stressed that it's a situation we could get out of. I wish you all the best. I found your presentation excellent. I'd like to wish you and your colleagues all the best. And you say you're very welcome here now and in the future. As for the negotiation on the particular files, then we are all parliamentarians first and foremost. We're not national governments, so we'll all try and cooperate. Thank you.
And the Commission is here.
So, ich bitte doch jetzt alle Kollegen.
Oh, thank you. Please let me ask you to take your seats.
Ich bitte auch die.
I'd like to ask the WHO representatives and all other representatives to take their seats. Mr. Schluter and other colleagues, Mr. Behrendt.
Yellow card.
So let's try and start. We have an objection pursuant to Rule 88.2 on the country of origin and place of provenance for fresh, chilled and frozen meat of swine, sheep, goats and poultry. We have a number of colleagues who have signed this objection. So Mr. Schluter, Kaliotak, Ms. Grun and Sophie Okoni. I would like to give them the floor in that order.
I think that it didn't come through on the translation.
Glenys Wilmot, please.
I didn't catch that. Thanks very much, Chair. I actually find it really incredible that we're actually having to have this debate. The Parliament has always been in favour of full country of origin labelling, including labelling the place of birth, rearing, slaughter for meat. It's also demanded by consumer groups. Even the US is now labelling where the meat is born, reared and slaughtered. And you would have thought that the horse meat scandal would have at the very least made the Commission and Member States realise that consumers expect clear and transparent labelling for meat. In fact, many of the ministers from Member States called for this when the scandal broke. Of course, we also want to see origin labelling for meat in processed food, but that's a topic we'll have to come back to. At the moment, we're just discussing fresh, pre-packaged meat.
But we do need to get the basic rules right. Labelling the place of birth, rearing and slaughter allows consumers to see how far an animal has been transported and choose meat from places with good animal welfare standards if that's their concern. Consumers already have got used to this labelling for beef, so why are we trying to create a two-tier system, a different system for every other meat? And surely it's misleading and therefore against food information regulation to say that a pig has been reared in a country after being there after just 4 months, or to say a chicken has been reared somewhere after just 1 month. It's just ridiculous. And we must remove the derogation for mincemeat and its trimmings, which will in effect restrict the labelling options that can be considered for meat used as an ingredient in sausages and lasagnas, etc., which we've still got to discuss. So I hope the Commission will reconsider their position. I know that they're under a lot of pressure from the food industry and from certain member states, but this really is not an acceptable solution for the Parliament or, more importantly, for consumers. 83% of consumers say they want this information, and it's an essential step in rebuilding trust in the industry if they're really serious about it. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Glennis.
Thank you, Ms. Wilmot. I give the word to Mr. Schluter.
Well, first of all, I agree with what Wilmot said, but additionally, the Commission has refused to come forward to reduce transport times for animals, and then having the original labelling for all 3 places helps the consumers to understand if the animal has been transported very long once or twice in its lifetime. If you only have 2, you would miss one of those transports. Secondly, we based our discussions on the model of the current beef labelling, where you have all 3 places. So that is, in our mindset, what we wanted to copy. And then in the impact assessment of the Commission, you have completely unrealistic cost estimates when you made your questionnaires to the Member States. Despite that, despite having 10% price increase in one of the examples, still, most want this. So it's, and then I wonder, 10%, we all know that the price of beef in Europe has not increased 10% because of original labelling. We know that. So why would it be so much more for other kinds of meat? Maybe slightly more, yes, for poultry, for example. But definitely not in the region of 10%. That is just a fake figure to try to get lower support from this in the questionnaire, in my opinion. So, and then we will later come to discussion on meat and processed products. I can admit it's more complicated there, even if I still want it also there. But even so, if you have 10% meat in a pizza, you wouldn't, and the whole pizza would become 10% more expensive, then the meat needs to be double price, which is not really realistic. But for a moment we talk about the first measure here on meat, pieces of meat, and that's what all of us expected, that you would come, and this is what we should have. So consumers, we know, are highly in favor of this, even at the 10% price increase. So why not do what the consumers want? Why not do what the Parliament wants? And we can all live happily ever after. And if the industry complains, send them to us. We will tell them what we think.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you, Renate Sommer.
Renate Sommer.
Renate Sommer.
Verzeihung, ich habe...
Sorry. Forgive me, I was daydreaming. Well, I am against this motion, and I'd be pleased to tell you why. This resolution responds to something which happened in the food labelling regulation. And in talking about the regulation, the trilogue, we agreed that the Commission would carry out an impact assessment on origin labelling for fresh meat. And that would really to assess whether it would be possible to have origin labelling, A, and B, what costs would be incurred. And the Commission promised that we would then, in the light of that assessment, make its decision. Well, the Commission has done that. We set a strict deadline for that impact assessment, but it does take time. I'm hardly enthusiastic, and I've said this before, that we were taken by surprise as a committee. Taken by surprise by what the Commission wants to do in the origin labelling for fresh meat. But at the end of the day, I think this is a rational regulation. I can understand why it's being done. They tested whether consumer interest in origin labelling is really so great. Well, again and again, people say that there is consumer interest. Well, it is true that if you ask the consumer, would you like this labelled, that labelled, that labelled, then of course the consumer says, yes, I want to have everything labelled, give me everything. But if then you ask the consumer, are you prepared to pay extra money for that? You're not going to get extra labelling free. Labelling costs money. Well, then the support dwindles. The consumer said, oh no, I didn't realise that. And if I have to pay more money, then frankly I'm less interested in additional labelling. That is obviously the same for origin labelling. With the appropriate cost, then the interest shrinks to only 10% of consumers. At a certain level, 40% of consumers say that they look at labelling. Well, if only 40% look at labelling in the shops, which is something which has been shown by consumer research, then really you can even doubt that figure. Because consumers say a lot about their own behaviour, but they're trying to present themselves as holier than thou. People just often don't bother. I'm a consumer too. I know what consumers are like. So consumer research is not easy. I don't think then we're justified in saying that there's overwhelming consumer interest in origin labelling. And the impact assessment supports me, I believe. The interest in buttering slaughter in origin labelling is only in fourth place. While first is quality. Price and other issues always come first. And only fourth do you have origin labelling. People obviously care less whether this meat comes from the EU or not. That was an issue which we considered labelling as well, whether the meat was from the EU or not. There are several options for labelling which have been investigated because different options would cost different amounts. The rearing and slaughter labelling, the two-tier labelling, would be the one that most closely corresponds to consumer interest, and that is the cheaper option. But if I want a three-tier labelling, birth, rearing and slaughter, then the costs increase exponentially. The administrative costs for businesses would be between 25,000 to 130,000 euros additionally per year. I think that's a great amount of money. We're not just talking about massive enterprises here. We're talking about SMEs, and they're usually disproportionately affected. You might also have additional burdens on the national authorities because they'd have additional testing obligations, control visits. Now, are the member states prepared to invest more money in increased control visits? I can't really say that they are interested in doing that. And then additional costs. The speaker asks the chair asks the speaker to conclude. I am concluding, says the speaker. Well, the consumer would also have to pay extra, and I think 90% of the costs would be borne by the consumer. So I think we should support the Commission's sensible option. And please, let's reject this objection. Dagmar Roth-Behrendt, the next minister here, 5 minutes.
than my colleague. I'm very surprised to listen to Mrs. Sommer, because when we had the horse meat scandal, belonging to her government minister, Mrs. Eichner, who is not agriculture minister anymore, said naturally there should be labelled a place of origin. Obviously there is a misunderstanding if place of origin is place of birth or place of rearing. But there again, does really anybody believes that anybody, a consumer, informed or not, would believe that if a chicken is reared somewhere for 4 weeks, that can then be called as a place of rearing? You naturally want to know the place of origin. And if anybody remembers why we did it on beef, why we labeled the place of birth on beef, it's me, because we did it during the BSE crisis. There it was evident for everybody that we labeled it, because people wanted to know where the meat is coming from, where the beef is coming from. And it is absolutely no justification to make a distinction there. And whoever says it makes things more expensive has to prove that, and it's not proven yet. And I must say, and I say that to the director of the Commission, I find it disgraceful, really disgraceful what you think to do. If I look into the Article 26, you have no justification for what you have put in front of us. Article 26 is very clear. It says indication of the country of origin or place of provenance shall be mandatory. And then there are some exemptions. Why do you use the exemptions? And why do you go even further and you take out of any proposal minced meat and trimmings as that? Whoever wants to go in front of any citizen with that will just really will be sent home immediately. And I can only assure you, I'll make a clear press release in Germany, and I'll make very clear who wants to give consumers the information and who does not care.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you for keeping it short. Mrs. Klaas, very shortly, briefly, please. Thank you. I'll be very brief. Let me remind you of the horse meat scandal. The horse meat scandal was unconnected to labelling. That was a sleight of hand. And we have to be clear on that. And that's why I'd like to support what Renate Sommer said. We can't document the life cycle of meat. That's beyond the realm of the possible, and that's why I support the Commission proposal. Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to the Commission.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I will be also short. You say in your resolution that the Commission exceeded its mandate. We, as you can imagine, don't think so, and we would like to refer you to the original legal base, 1169/2011, and more in particular, let's say, whereas clause 31. This whereas clause refers, of course, to the beef situation, but clearly lays down also that original labelling can differ from one type of meat to another according to the characteristics of the animal species. And it goes on to say that mandatory requirements could vary from one type of meat to another. And there the principle of proportionality and administrative burden has to be taken into consideration. Further on, Article 26(9) itself clearly refers to impacts, assessments to be made and options for modalities as regards to birth, rearing and slaughter. On the basis of that legal base, Mr. President, that the Commissioner, of course, made this impact assessment, and in that context has, of course, had quite a lot of context with the different stakeholders and national administration, and tried, as we put ourselves in the whereas clause, to strike the right balance between, on the one hand, the need to inform consumers on the origin of the meat, and on the other hand, the additional cost which have, as you can imagine, an impact on the price for the consumers. The impact assessment and the study carried out by the external expert came to the conclusion that among the various possible options, the one striking the best balance between cost and meaningfulness for consumer was the one retaining the member states as the appropriate geographical model. In that context, to apply a beef model, that means involving birth, rearing and slaughter, as compared to a model of rearing and slaughter only, appear to be more complicated. Firstly, for these animals like pigs and chicken and sheep, the production life cycle is much shorter, and existing animal identification systems do not always allow it in all cases, and would have then be put in place with all the administrative burden involved. In terms of meaningfulness for consumers, the focus point for the study was the place of rearing. This is confirmed by the results also of the Eurobarometer to be published in the next few days, showing that while indeed 88% of the European consumers consider necessary the mandatory origin labelling of meats, only 47% are of the view that the place of birth is relevant in this context. In terms of additional cost, the independent consultant estimated that the additional cost of applying the beef model, also compared to the system finally retained, would be 53% more for pig meat and 34% for poultry and 220% for sheep and goat. This would amount to an overall cost of around 1.3 billion euros as compared to the option retained slaughter and reared and slaughter, where it would be around 800 million euros, so almost double the cost. And needless to say once more that those additional costs risk to be transferred to the final consumers. A final word as regards minced meat and trimmings. The draft resolution contests also the simpler indication of origin of provenance for minced meat and trimmings, for which the provenance can be indicated at EU or non-EU level. We think that this is justified by the nature of these products, which are often obtained by the combination of various batches. Indeed, this simplified approach for minced meat and trimmings is also possible already in the beef sector. And in your resolution, you refer to the beef sector, that giving the impression that this is not possible in the beef sector, but I like to remind you that this is also possible in the beef sector. So, Mr. President, I'd like to conclude by saying that the Commission is of the opinion that it remained within its mandate, that it struck the right balance between, on the one hand, informing the consumer and the additional cost involved. And in that context, this proposal has been adopted by a majority of member states in the context of the implementing procedure. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. So the minister's here. We'll leave it at that. We're going to be voting this afternoon. And if that is successful, then in February, we'll be voting in plenary on this objection. So I would like to express thanks to the minister who's already waiting to join us.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest that we all take our seats and that we proceed on the basis of our agenda. So I'd like to express a warm welcome to the Minister of Rural Development and Food from Greece, Mr. Tsaftaris. Welcome to you. And as per usual, we're going to have a presentation by you, Minister. After that, there'll be a series of questions from the coordinators. Then the Minister will be given an opportunity to respond. And after that, we'll open up the question and answer period for all fellow MEPs. And I would ask you all to be very brief so that everybody gets a chance to raise their issues. So, Minister, it's terrific that you're here today. And there's a number of topics. Just to mention, GMO is one to get people's interest up, but there's a host of issues when it comes to the seed regulation. We have a number of issues on our agenda that are going to be keeping us busy, both Envy and Agri. But I'll leave it at that, and we're looking very much forward to your presentation. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Grote. Κύριε Πρόεδρε.
Chairman, honourable members, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honour for me to be here today on the occasion of taking up the 5th Greek presidency of the European Union to present to your committee our work programme in the Agriculture and Fisheries Council. The current moment when Greece is taking up the Council presidency is very unusual, and it's a transitional phase for Europe. At this turning point, what's at stake for the European Union is our ability to promote growth, competitiveness and employment, particularly of young Europeans, and guaranteeing stability and prosperity for all citizens. The European Union needs to confirm its mission within the hearts and minds of European citizens. So, promoting policies for growth, fighting unemployment, and improving economic and social cohesion, and sustainable reforms, deepening our union and completing the economic and monetary union, as well as facing our external challenges, such as the immigration issue, is the framework for the Greek presidency's priorities. Maritime policy is one subject which cross-cuts all of our other priorities. As regards the priorities in the field of agriculture and fisheries, as you all know, we're talking about an important area for growth and employment. As regards our various reports, well, we will continue to work on them. I want to go into details on those, but I should point out that this sector guarantees the safety of our food, respecting the natural resources that require management in a sustainable way, in order to be sustainable in general. It also works to look after society and consumers. Europe is a great exporter, and it has very high safety standards. It has very high standards for production. which improves and continues to give value to the European image. There is the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy. We want to have a greener, more effective approach to agriculture. Our first job, then, is to finish that reform. We have to have the delegated acts approved by the Commission. And despite the initial worries, the Commission looks like it will have delegated acts that reflect our political agreement on the new regulations of the Common Agricultural Policy. The European Parliament and the Council will be in a position to agree this and give our EU farmers the opportunity to continue to produce and invest. At the same time, we have to assess some of the CAP measures and identified areas for improvement. We have to strengthen the position of family farmers. We have to bring them closer to consumers for the mutual benefit of both. In the Council, we're going to look at a report that we're looking forward to receiving from the Commission on this subject as regards a reform of the 2007 law on fruit and vegetable, and we want to have some substantial conclusions in that area. This is an important sector, not just for the economy and the growth of the European Union, but for food as well. In the same context, the Greek presidency is planning to discuss the Commission report on the future of the dairy sector following the end of quotas. The file of promoting agricultural products is also vital for the Greek presidency. The study of the proposals from the Commission on the review of those measures on school programs to distribute agricultural products to students, organic farming, and proposals for outlying and island areas of the European Union are included in the 6-month work programme, as well as the report on creating a special label for island agriculture. Now, on the report for local agriculture and immediate or direct sale, we are expecting the Commission to research the issue further and come up with a legislative proposal on that. On the common fisheries policy, a political agreement has already been reached with the European Parliament on the common market management. The goal is to guarantee more sustainable management of stocks. In order to complete this reform, the main priority that we have is to reach an agreement on the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund. The task force and the working group show the goodwill on both sides of the Parliament and the Council to find a realistic solution, and these bodies will continue their work in order to get further results, and we want to achieve those by March 2014. Another priority is work on implementing the discard ban. In the context of the reform of the CFP, we took on the Commission's proposal and we hope that we will be able to study it. The Presidency also wants to promote work on amending the regulation on deep water fishing, bearing in mind the constructive work that has been done by the Parliament on that dossier. Now, on the life of animals and plants and the safety of the food chain, the Council accepted the Commission package on safer animals and plants and a safer food chain, which covers the health of plants and animals, seed material, and the budget. This package was adopted by the Commission to deal with very complex issue in the individual sectors, but also in an attempt to modernise the legislative framework. This is of vital importance for consumer confidence and the trust between businesses, business partners and sustainability in the production of food. Although the European Union has the highest level of safety of food, the crisis that it has faced in the food chain is sometimes due to inaccurate labelling, sometimes because of fraud, or because there was no identification of animal illnesses, and this means that our legislation has been modernised. The 5 proposals in the package are particularly important, and the Greek presidency will give a high priority to this, continuing the work of the 2 previous presidencies of the trio, Ireland and Lithuania, taking into account the important progress that has been made in the European Parliament on this subject. The Greek presidency will finish the technical report on these particular proposals and will come up with a compromise text that will include all the views expressed by member states. At the same time, the Greek presidency will closely monitor the work of the European Parliament in order to conclude the interactions that will take place over the course of the next Parliament. Particularly, the proposal on plant propagating material. The Greek presidency will work closely with the European Parliament in order to open the way for a future agreement. We are well aware of the concerns that were expressed by some MEPs, but also by groups of citizens, on the various challenges included in that proposal. The Council is looking very closely at the proposal on the effects and consequences. These are a very important part of such a proposal, and the goal, as I said, is to simplify and modernise a series of technical measures that have been in place for several years now. Of course, a great effort is still required in order to get clear rules, even within the context of implementing and delegated acts. Now, as regards the proposal for a regulation on spending in the animal husbandry and plant area, we have been working hard to get this approved during this Parliament, and we want to have an agreement at a political level. The Commission's report on the necessary registry of meat and the origin of meat is part of our plan. The Greek presidency is ready to start working on studying these proposals to do with cloning of animals in the context of the preparatory bodies of the Council. All those bodies who have already become involved in the discussion know how sensitive this issue is. The Greek presidency also knows that there has been a recent discussion in the Environment Committee about cloning of animals, and we will continue to closely monitor the work in the Parliament. We're still expecting some Commission proposals, and we will go ahead with a technical analysis if they're given to us in good time. It's about foodstuffs that can be used as medicines. We want to try to bring some legislation into line with the Lisbon Treaty. We're expecting a Commission report on that, and we're looking forward to having constructive debates with the Commission. Lastly, on the new EU strategy for forests and the forestry sector, under the last presidency, some draft conclusions set out some guidelines for the new forestry strategy, and we are still looking at those under the Greek presidency. Honourable Chairman, honourable members, I gave you a brief overview of the Greek presidency's priorities in a series of areas which we're going to deal with in the next few months in the context of the Agriculture and Fisheries Council. It's very important that we're having European elections during our presidency. This is a chance for us to work realistically, but also with dedication. We want to get good results. We're basing that goal on active cooperation with the European Parliament. That is vital in order for us to achieve our goals and find solutions on a series of very important and sensitive issues. Thank you very much for your attention. And Chair, I'll be delighted to hear any questions that you or the members of the committee have. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Thank you very much, Minister. So here we go. This is the speakers list. Roth-Behrendt, Koumoutakis, Koustaras, Danielis, and Jill. Have I overlooked anyone? No? Great. So I suggest that we take it each in turn. Dagmar Roth-Behrendt, please. Thank you very much, Chairman. Minister, President of the Council, thank you for your presentation. I have two questions on two different issues that are within the precinct of our committee, GMOs and cloning. Both were addressed in a proposal a few years back, and this is something that was not endorsed by the Parliament. Member state countries were not willing to agree with the Parliament with regards to products of cloned animals. So question number one. There is now a proposal from the European Commission, but it contains nothing at all as regards the labeling of products of cloned animals. It prescribes cloned animals being marketed, but nobody was planning to do that. No producer would do that because it's too expensive to clone animals. It doesn't make economic sense. So when it comes to marketing, we're talking about the second or even the third generation in the context of products of cloned animals. If we can't come up with a ban here, would you agree with me that the minimum should be the labeling of products of cloned animals of the second and third generation? Now on genetically modified organisms. President, as you may know, this is a very sensitive issue in the EU. You even just said that yourself. The European Parliament did adopt a resolution on this score, with a view to securing that the authorization of GM maize, Pioneer 1507, should not be allowed. So when it comes to the authorization proposal, what is your take going to be? Are you going to be discussing this in the coming months? And are you prepared, with regard to the Commission proposal that's now on the table, to discuss that? As you may know, the ECJ has said that the European Commission, in connection with a different product, in respect of the involvement and participation of the member states. So the court ruled on this GM potato starch, and I take it when it comes to other products, there's got to be member states on board, and the European Parliament has to be taken seriously. I don't believe we can release any more products because we can't guarantee the safety. And even Monsanto and other major producers just plan on releasing their products in the U.S. And then they're hoping, of course, that with the forthcoming transatlantic agreement, they might make it into European markets. That's something we have to keep an eye on. But focusing now on EU policy, would you agree that when it comes to the maize, the Pioneer 1507, that there are sufficient grounds to consider that it shouldn't be authorized? Thank you very much. Next, coming to Gastus.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Minister, let me welcome you to the Environment Committee and Public Health and Food Safety. The competence of this committee will give you a clue as to the question I'm about to ask you, and it has a link to what was just mentioned in terms of cloned animals and the various issues that arise from that big problem. It's about protecting public health. As you and everybody in Europe, I think, knows, the incredible scandals that have taken place over recent years, and that has given a sense of uncertainty to the consumer, and that is a huge problem. It's got to do with both animal and non-animal products. That demonstrates the need for a full information to the consumer about the origin and quality of their food, as well as the nutritional values it contains. This is very important for European citizens. My question is, under the Greek presidency of the European Council, are you considering bringing political pressure to bear and taking real steps to protect public health in the EU in light of the very important political decisions, perhaps the most important in the history of the European Union and the European Parliament? This is a burning issue. This is vital for European society. It's about their right to obtain correct information about the quality, origin and nutritional value of their food. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Krista Klaas, please. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, President, for outlining your program. I thought, goodness me, on the 18th of April, the European Parliament is going to be going into the elections. And when it comes to the time we can work together, it's very short indeed. And it's also become very clear that as Minister for Rural Development and Food, you cover a very broad areas, covering a lot of our EP committees. It's the agricultural policy, of course, that springs to mind, and the Agri Committee is going to have a lot to deal with there, and we're looking forward to the delegated acts. And when it comes to greening in particular, that's a big issue where that covers a spectrum of views. But let me just tell you, as a member of this committee, that greening can't just mean setting land aside. No. What it means is sustainability. And I think that's going to be a recurring theme during your presidency. Then an issue you didn't mention, and here too, it's a matter of using agricultural land, and namely for energy. And in the EP, we've talked about biofuel. We've concluded that in the first reading, and the Lithuanian presidency unfortunately couldn't see it through. So apparently this may be on your agenda. Is that true? And there's the decisive factor when it comes to biofuel, which is to be able to wrap it up quickly, because when it comes to biomass crops, if we want to produce our own biofuel, we have to take a different approach when it comes to the use of agricultural land. So is this going to be put on the back burner and passed on to Italy, or is Greece going to be tackling it? You talked about the plant propagating material. Here too, this is being discussed. Agriculture Committee is in the lead, but we're discussing it here. And it isn't immediately apparent what the big advantage of merging these 12 regulations into one, and why is this being rushed? I think we should take the requisite time rather than maybe getting things wrong. Where's the urgency here? I wish you all the best in the course of your presidency, which of course would spell success for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yoris Benelis.
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister, welcome to our committee. I'd like to hope that the Greek presidency will be constructive and effective in dealing with many of the issues that concern our European home. Minister, you know that as regards greening, the outcome was below the expectations and the hopes that we had. So, faced with that reality, and given your personal sensitivities to this issue, how does the Greek presidency, through promoting the implementing acts that you have in front of you, and this really needs to be sped up during your presidency, how do you see yourself supporting the provision of measures to combat climate change and protect the environment? And how do you think you will use the tools and the mechanisms to support farmers, and particularly young farmers, to convert their innovative knowledge and turn this into providing service and knowledge that is so lacking in so many of our countries, and particularly characterizes the knowledge that existed in a previous generation? Thank you.
Thank you, Jill Evans.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for a very comprehensive presentation. And I noticed that one of your messages is that we have to work more closely with consumers. And I know from the past few months, the the biggest two issues on which my constituents in Wales have contacted me have been on seeds, on plant propagated materials that have been mentioned, and on GMOs. And it's the issue of GMOs that I would like to come back to, because as we've heard just last Thursday, the European Parliament voted with a considerable majority for a resolution put forward by my group, by the Green EFA group, rejecting the proposal to authorise the GM maize 1507. One of the reasons for this rejection was because the Commission was exceeding its powers, its implementing powers. And the Court of Justice did declare on the GM potato, on the Amflora case, that the Commission had been acting unlawfully because it hadn't consulted the Regulatory Committee after modifying the authorisation proposal after the first vote. Now, it's clear from that case that when the proposal has been changed after the vote from the Regulatory Committee, it has to be sent back to that committee and not to the Council. And we are in this position again. But it seems that the Presidency has put the proposal as a point A in the next ECOFIN Council. And why isn't the Greek Presidency first asking the Commission to send the modified proposal back to the Regulatory Committee for a vote to prevent that legal challenge happening again? I mean, I think it should be the Agriculture Council that deals with the issue, and I think that there should be a full debate. And we look to Greece with the very strong position that Greece has taken in defence of GM-free agriculture to take a strong stand on this issue too. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. The next speaker is Peter Agneso, then Karl-Heinz Florenz, and then Criselo Golos.
Sí. Muchas gracias, señor ministro, por habernos explicado.
Thank you very much, Minister, for having set out your programme. It's very dense. I'd also like to wish you an excellent presidency. You're speaking as a Minister of Food Safety and a Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development. And as such, I think you have a very good overview of all the problems that we face. I think food safety in Europe is absolutely extraordinary. Our legislation is very ambitious. For me, it's the best in the world in terms of preventing any problem that may occur with food. We can't obviously, though, avoid fraud and criminals, because we have issues of fraud, but we also have criminals of crime. I have a series of issues to ask you about. On the issue of food safety, we have very strict legislation. Many farmers complain about that, and I'm sure you'll understand why. You come from a southern country like mine, where insects reproduce and multiply in a way that they don't necessarily do in the north of Europe. Legislation on pesticides is very strict, and it outlawed a series of products. That means that it's impossible for us to fight certain insects. The farmers in my country take a very dim view of that, and I'd like to know how Greek farmers have reacted to this. This is one of the many issues that we have. One is the excessive costs involved, but now on labelling of origin of meat. We've passed a resolution last week in Strasbourg, and I'd like to know your opinion on it, because a legislation that requires labelling of meat as an ingredient in something, I don't think that will solve any problems, and I'm talking about the horse meat problem. Because if you don't comply with one law, then you can not be complying with several, and there are several laws involved here, and they're quite complicated. I would repeat the words of the Director General of Sanco, Ms. Dettori. I'm talking about meat ingredients in processed food here. Now we have the issue on plant material. This is a very complex debate, and I think it will probably be passed on to the next Parliament. This debate has become mixed with other regulations. It's been mixed up with organic farming, and what we're talking about is protecting varieties and certifying varieties. It's also been mixed up with the issue of small-scale farming. I'd like to know your opinion on this. I think we have to define better what a small-scale farmer is and what a farmer is who sells traditional varieties on a local market, and what is a seed market. If we identified this properly, we could avoid a lot of problems, because many large seed multinationals exist, but 80% of companies who sell seeds are small and medium-sized enterprises. If we allow weak legislation that doesn't allow some companies into the legislation, what we're going to create is a grey market that we can't control. We really need to support small producers and seed exchange, but we need to avoid this to be a smokescreen for a grey market which we can't control. Thank you.
Florence.
Thank you, Karl-Heinz Lorenz. And then Chrysogoras. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Well, I hope you can all hear me. Good. Excellent. Well, I would like to welcome you to this meeting, Minister. And I have to say that I, as a German, have to stress that I'm very pleased that you took over the presidency, even though your circumstances are difficult, but we're doing our best to support you. Now, I may be repeating myself here. I've been asking this question for 20 years. We have many things we have agreed as a European Union, but many things have not been implemented, and I could spend all my speaking time talking about those things. So my question is, do you have any idea about how we can implement what we have commonly resolved? We don't all need to have the highest standards, but we do need to have common standards. Now, you might have plant protection in North Rhine-Westphalia, which are different than in Belgium and the Netherlands. I'm a farmer, so I know those differences. So my question is, have you taken part in agricultural conferences? Do you have ideas to solve that? Thank you. Last but not least, and Sigolas, please stick to the speaking time.
Thank you. I think many very important issues have been brought up by other colleagues, Minister. The issue of GMAs 1507, that has to be dealt with very quickly. And we can't open the door under the Greek presidency to other GMOs after such a lot of hard work over the last few years. I think I brought this up with you in December as well. There's an issue with honey as well. And the honey producers and consumers. The Parliament voted on a provision that talks about modified proportions of honey. And the Council will have to discuss this and give us some answers. There's a very serious issue in the context of the dialogue with the US. We would like to hear the view of the Presidency and the Council on this, which is products from cloned animals. We want to know whether you've developed a strategy for this. We know that the US are exerting a great amount of pressure on the EU not to record the origin of these products. So we'd like to have an update on how things are going in terms of preparations for that. We would also like to know whether you've looked at the ban on new nicotine drugs. We wonder whether you have followed this in the Council and whether Member States are implementing that ban, or if you have any details about that. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to give the floor back to the Minister.
Thank you once again. And thank you all for these very interesting questions. Let me start from the more general subjects, such as the general productive procedure of Europe, the new CAP, and the various issues relating to that. And then I will go along talking about more specific issues such as GMOs and honey and cloned animals. Let me start with the most general subject from Mr. Koumoutsakos. As we all know, even in a small country in Europe such as Greece, Europe has such a varied environment and it produces such a variety of very high quality products. When we look at Greek agriculture, that's very different if it's on a Greek island or if it's in the mountains or in the plains of Thessaly. If you introduced well, the principle applies to the rest of Europe. There is such a huge variety in the way Europe produces its products, and that's its main advantage. It's an asset. And Europe has policies to support that form of producing quality products. Europe wants to support the marks with geographic indicators and designated origins. They're now coming up with island production labels and mountain labels and the label for traditional European products. That shows that the policy, the strategy, is to support quality through real measures and institutions. We are working towards that goal. And as such, in the informal council in Athens under the Greek presidency, on the 4th to the 6th of May, that will be the subject of conversation. We're going to look at how the strategic advantage of the variety in the forms of production, which is reflected in the variety of products, can be turned into a strategic asset of Europe faced with its competitors. Now, on the issue of the common agricultural policy, which Mr. Danelis asked about, I think the common features of this policy that was decided on by all of us show that significant European resources will be given to supporting European agriculture and the producers as well. We want to support greening, and I would like to emphasize that in particular because Ms. Klaas brought that up. We want to support young farmers. Let's not forget that the aging of the farming population affects European production as a whole. And it's no surprise that most of the resources of the new CAP should be given to young farmers. Because, as we all know, we may succeed in farming with less water, with less energy, or with less fertilizer, but we can't have agriculture without farmers. And this is why we're making such a concerted effort in that direction. As regards the other challenges that are dealt with in the new CAP, we are looking more closely at the needs of consumers and producers. We want to have better food, and we want to, under Horizon 2020, prepare for upcoming climate change. We don't just want to limit them or mitigate them. We want to be ready to face them. And as a Greek minister for agriculture, I'd like to say that my country is actually experiencing these changes already. And it's having its effect on agriculture. We've got a problem that trees are not producing fruits. We're seeing new insects, new diseases coming from countries to our south. The only way to make our agriculture sustainable is through research, science, technology, using the natural wealth of our environment. We have a genetic material. This is a wealth that needs to be used in the future and used better. We'll use all the tools, whether it's research, knowledge and education, such as the role of advisors that go to farmers to transmit knowledge to that farmer, and the new tool that's being developed at European level, which is the innovation clusters. All the stakeholders of this procedure, everybody involved, importers and distributors, can come together to exchange their knowledge and expertise. Now, on the more specific question about the CAP greening, the achievement of CAP is to spend 30% of resources on environmentally friendly practices. It was an important political decision, and it shows that European Union institutions listen to the message that that society is sending them, and particularly generations of the future, because that's what sustainability means. It means we have to listen to those who will make up generations of the future. They are saying to us that we also have to have clean water, clean earth. We have to be able to produce food as well. All of the decisions in the CAP show how that goal should be achieved. For example, the CAP says that there should be crop rotation. We should avoid cultivating always the same thing on the same ground. We all know that crop rotation is more sustainable than a monoculture. We have to put longer-term crops. We all know that these longer-term crops are preferable to one-year crops. There has to be an increase in subsidies for those farmers that do that. When we grow animal feed in Europe, not only do we give food to European consumers and contribute to the Mediterranean diet that we all agree is the best, but we're also supporting environmental measures. There's no better way of reducing production costs than reducing the cost of importing chemical fertilizer. Because you can create plants that take nitrogen from the atmosphere, and that's much more effective in terms of creating fertilizer. Now, On organic farming, small and medium-sized enterprises and producers, as I said, within the Common Agricultural Policy, one way that has been identified to help those SMEs is to simplify bureaucratic procedures, and in the CAP, new procedures for producers who are under a certain amount of size or under a certain amount of subsidies. They will not require extra bureaucratic procedures. And that's a way we found of helping them. What about short supply chains, farmers' markets? Where a small farm can bring their produce directly to the consumer. These are all tools that are moving in the direction that you've mentioned. In other words, supporting small-scale farmers. That's a tradition, and that's still part of the spectrum of European farming. As regards the complex issues, brought up by the German MEP, I will repeat. Something can be implemented if it's simple. The simpler something is, the easier it is for a small-scale farmer to implement it. Otherwise, if it's complicated, then it will be easy for a big or a larger scale farmer to implement, but not a small scale. And lastly, on this specific issue, I'd like to say that when we come up with cross-cutting reforms, there are going to be situations where a member state has specificities and they may have difficulties in implementing it. Let me give you an example. It's to do with obligations for landing under the common fisheries policy. Let's say it's easy for a company to offload cod onto one port and have it weighed. A country that follows that sort of process, it can easily implement the new rule. In my country, though, where we have through 30 or so species in smaller quantities, and we will land them in 150 different ports, you can see how difficult it will be to implement that regulation. So there again, we have to... We shouldn't spend money just to certify 1 kilo of fish. Now, as regards the more specific questions that you raised on cloned animals, that's a sort of concern to everybody. I've referred to it before, but the discussion on these proposals has just happened. I think it was on the 19th of December the proposal came from the Commission, and discussions haven't begun in the Council yet, but they will begin very shortly. I haven't got a great deal to say at this stage on behalf of the Council as such. As I said, the Presidency wants to continue to study that within Council, and we've already set out dates for meetings on that. Now, as regards genetically modified organisms, this is a very important issue, and it's of importance to society. As you well know, from 2010, no GMO variety has been approved for cultivation in Europe. The most recent one, Amflora potato, that you talked about, the approval of that was cancelled in December. So the only crop is still Monsanto maize, 810. And they are not expected to look for a renewal of that approval for some years. As regards maize 1507, which is a very specific case, the proposal has been submitted by the Commission through the judicial ruling that you have mentioned, and we are following the well-known procedure in co-repair. Today it's being looked at technical level, and on Friday it will be looked at co-repair. We want to look at how member states are planning to vote. It's a very specific procedure. It's set out by the rules of procedure for the Council, and the presidency has no option to duck out of those rules. We respect them. Now, on the package on safer animals, I'm sorry to take a few more minutes than I was given, but I want to be as thorough as possible in my answers to the members. So on the package for safer animals and plants, particularly as regards plant propagating material, the Greek presidency will work hand in hand with the European Parliament and the Council in order to get an agreement in future. We are very aware of the concerns that have been expressed by some MEPs, but also the political parties and groups on the various challenges presented in the proposal. The Parliament has made its views very clear on the potential consequences. We need to modernise and simplify the various technical measures that have been in existence for several years. This requires a lot of work, I agree, in order to get clear rules and legal certainty, including any that may be decided on with implementing acts or delegated acts. For the Greek presidency, this is a very serious issue, and we will look at this using as much time as we have available to us during the presidency, and I will work very hard on that matter. Thank you very much. I don't want to take up any more time, Chairman. Thanks again.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Minister. Well, we will have the opportunity to come back over the coming months and to negotiate particular files with each other. We are in the ENVI committee. This is the biggest legislative committee of this Parliament, and that's why we have very many issues still to cover, because we want to ensure continuity rather than discontinuity, which would be a bad thing, which would mean because the next Parliament have to start from the very beginning. So let me wish you all the best for the next few months. It will be a marathon, so lots of courage and lots of endurance. You have to run the same distance, but you have to run it faster than most other presidencies. You only have until April, really, because after that we are facing the elections. But again, I wish you every success for your presidency. I have passed the same wish on to the Minister of Health. I'd like to say that I'm very pleased that you did take up the presidency and that your economy is improving. I know how much you had to do to tackle the crisis. I know that on a personal level as well, because I frequently go to Greece on holiday, but I know that here as well from a legislative point of view. So again, all the best for you and for Greece. Thank you.